long before oil shocks, before currency collapses, before borders carved the world into nations, power followed something far more primitive. Water, not as a symbol, not as poetry, but as force. Whoever controlled water decided who could farm, who could settle, who could eat, and who would leave, kneel or die. Today, water conflict is framed as a future crisis, something climate change will bring, something population growth will trigger. But that story misses the uncomfortable truth. Water has never been neutral. It has always been political, always rationed, always contested, not because it was rare, because it was controllable. Water alone doesn't create power. Power emerges the moment water is organized, diverted, stored, and denied. And when societies learn how to do that, they learn how to rule. Welcome to the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Civilization did not begin with trade. It began with irrigation. The first great cities did not rise where land was richest. They rose where water could be managed. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River Basin. These were not geographic accidents. They were experiments in control. Rivers flooded unpredictably. They destroyed crops. They left salt in the soil. Unmanaged, they were as dangerous as they were life-giving. Survival required coordination. Canals had to be dug, levees reinforced, flood cycles predicted. Someone had to decide when water flowed, where it flowed, and who received it. That someone became authority. In early Mesopotamia, irrigation canals stretched across arid plains, turning desert into farmland. But canals demand labor, timing, discipline. If one city diverted too much water upstream, the downstream city starved. If a canal collapsed during flood season, fields turned to swamp or dust. Water allocation wasn't environmental policy. It was geopolitics. City-states fought over canals the way later empires fought over ports. Sometimes you didn't need to conquer a rival city. You just needed to dry it out. This logic was understood early and written into law. The Code of Hammurabi contained detailed regulations on canal maintenance and water negligence. If a landowner failed to maintain his irrigation ditch and caused flooding, he paid. If negligence destroyed a neighbor's crop, compensation was mandatory. Water mismanagement wasn't inefficient. It was criminal. That tells you everything. Water was infrastructure, and infrastructure was power. In Egypt, the Nile flooded predictably, but predictability required management. Flood levels determined harvests. Harvest determined taxation. Taxation determined state capacity. Pharaohs didn't rule by divine myth alone. They ruled by calendars, by flood measurements, by grain storage. When the flood was generous, the state thrived. When it failed, legitimacy cracked. This wasn't ideology. It was logistics. Farther east, Imperial China built what historians later called a hydraulic state. Massive canals, dams, flood control systems. The bureaucracy that managed water became the backbone of governance. Officials weren't just administrators. They were flow managers. Control the river. Control the population. The Roman Empire reached the same conclusion through aqueducts. Aqueducts weren't luxury projects. They were stability projects. Cities dependent on Roman water systems were cities dependent on Roman authority. Maintenance required imperial funding. Access required loyalty. Water flowed downhill. Power flowed back to Rome. And when water stopped flowing, cities emptied. Here's the insight modern narratives often miss. These civilizations didn't fight water wars because they lacked water. They fought because water systems created leverage. Scarcity was rarely absolute. Control was everything. As irrigation expanded, populations grew. As populations grew, dependence deepened. More people meant more food demand. More food demand meant tighter coordination. Coordination required authority. Authority demanded compliance. For centuries, this loop created stability, but it also created fragility. Because when an entire civilization reorganizes itself around centralized water control, failure becomes catastrophic. If a canal silts up, if a dam breaks, If political conflict interrupts maintenance, the whole system is exposed. This is where water shifts from source of power to source of collapse. In Mesopotamia, centuries of irrigation slowly poisoned soil. Salt accumulated. Crop yields fell. Farmers switched from wheat to barley. Quieter, less productive, but more salt-tolerant. The system adapted until it couldn't. In Mesoamerica, the Maya civilization built vast reservoirs to survive seasonal drought. Those systems supported large cities in fragile environments. But prolonged droughts, elite overreach, and rigid politics pushed the structure beyond its limits. When water failed, legitimacy followed. In Southeast Asia, Angkor engineered one of the most sophisticated hydraulic networks of the pre-modern world. Massive reservoirs, intricate canals, precise flood controls. For centuries it worked. Then rainfall patterns shifted. Political instability grew. Maintenance faltered. The system clogged. Floods alternated with drought. The city didn't explode. It emptied. Quietly. That's the pattern worth noticing. Water systems rarely collapse dramatically. They decay slowly. Maintenance budgets shrink. Coordination weakens. Small failures compound. By the time crisis is visible, adaptation is already too late. And this is not ancient history in the dismissive sense. It's a blueprint. It's a template. Because when a society centralizes control over something as fundamental as water, it doesn't just centralize survival. It centralizes decision-making. Maintenance schedules stop being technical. They become political. Access stops being natural. It becomes leverage. Investment follows the flow. Neglect accumulates quietly where it doesn't. That dynamic never disappeared. It scaled. Today, water doesn't move through hand-dug canals or seasonal floodplains. It moves through dams, through treaties, through pricing systems, through infrastructure that stretches across borders. But the logic is unchanged. Whoever controls upstream controls downstream. Whoever controls flow controls outcomes. This is why many modern conflicts that look ideological or geopolitical are underneath hydraulic. Consider the great transboundary rivers, the Nile River, the Tigris River and Euphrates River, the Indus River, the Mekong River. These are not just bodies of water. They are economic arteries. Agriculture depends on them. Electricity depends on them. Industry depends on them. Entire cities depend on them. When an upstream nation builds a dam, it isn't just generating power. It's generating optionality. And optionality is leverage. The conflict rarely begins with scarcity. It begins with asymmetry. Upstream states gain flexibility. Downstream states inherit uncertainty. That imbalance reshapes negotiations long before anyone mentions war. Treaties become financial instruments. Water release schedules become political signals. Infrastructure becomes diplomacy by other means. Nothing communicates strategic advantage quite like deciding when someone else's fields get wet. And here, the analogy to money becomes unavoidable. Just as early states learned to control water flows, modern states learn to control capital flows, liquidity, credit, energy, shipping lanes, data networks. The pattern is identical. Centralize the system, optimize efficiency, depend on stability, then act surprised when disruption becomes political. Water pricing offers a clean example. In many modern cities, water is no longer treated as a shared commons. It's treated as an asset. Utilities finance infrastructure, recover costs through pricing, model demand curves. On paper, this improves efficiency. In reality, it introduces a different fragility, affordability. When prices rise faster than incomes, access stratifies. When maintenance is deferred to protect budgets, failure compounds. When infrastructure remains invisible, decay goes unnoticed until the taps run dry. And when they do, the issue is never framed as a spreadsheet miscalculation. It's framed as a crisis of legitimacy. The same pattern that unraveled ancient hydraulic states returns. The system didn't fail because water vanished. It failed because allocation broke trust. Most modern water crises are not about absolute shortage. Reservoirs exist. Pipes exist. Engineers exist. What fails is coordination between institutions, between incentives, between short-term politics and long-term maintenance. Efficiency was rewarded, redundancy was cut, maintenance was postponed. The system worked until it didn't, and when it stopped working, consequences cascaded. Irrigation falters, food prices rise, hydropower drops, energy costs spike. Inflation spreads not as a shock, but as a chain reaction. Citizens don't experience this as infrastructure misalignment. They experience it as instability. And instability demands a narrative. Someone must be blamed. Someone must have hoarded. Someone must have miscalculated. Sometimes that's true, but more often, the failure is structural. The system was optimized for calm conditions. It broke under stress. History keeps offering this lesson. We keep ignoring it. Societies don't collapse because they rely on resources. They collapse because they mistake control for permanence. Ancient rulers believed canals would always flow if authority was strong enough. Modern policymakers believe infrastructure will always hold if funding models are clever enough. Both are half right and dangerously wrong, because flows are never static. Climate shifts, demand evolves, political incentives distort decisions. Systems built for yesterday's stability struggle with tomorrow's variability. That's where financial mistakes compound. Capital chases efficiency. Markets price continuity. Institutions assume tomorrow will resemble yesterday, just with better technology. Meanwhile, critical systems grow more centralized, more complex, more fragile. Water exposes this illusion because it cannot be abstracted away. You can't print it. You can't hedge it with derivatives. You can't replace it with narrative. When it stops flowing, reality asserts itself. And reality does not negotiate. The uncomfortable lesson is not that scarcity causes conflict. It's that control creates dependence. Dependence creates vulnerability. The societies that endured longest were not those with the grandest infrastructure. They were the ones that preserved slack, multiple sources, decentralized access, redundancy, humility. That principle applies to water and to money. History does not reward systems that perform perfectly under ideal conditions. It rewards systems that fail gracefully, because the next major conflict rarely announces itself as a war over resources. It appears as something technical, a budget dispute, a treaty revision, a delayed maintenance cycle, a pricing adjustment, something boring, until it isn't. If this gave you a new lens, subscribe to the Financial Historian. History has already mapped the pattern. You just need to know where to look.